All right. Well, I teach meditation. Meditation is the vehicle that we try to kind of illuminate here as a path to finding a sense of well-being and freedom and happiness and joy. And then, meditation is just really one component of several components found within Buddhism. And so then we try to kind of pick apart different teachings that, are relevant, hopefully, to today. And I often do that from a psychological lens, just mainly because that's my orientation. Studied East-West psychology, and I'm a licensed therapist and been a meditation teacher for 20 years or so. So that's kind of my orientation. Yeah. So we're gonna sit in some meditation for a while, and then I have some ideas of what I'd like to focus on today, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So let's just kind of jump into it, finding a posture that's workable, that's sustainable. Also know at the end of the meditation, I'll open up for any questions, just kind of general questions about meditation or about Buddhism or anything like that. And if there's nothing, then I'll get into a topic. See, that's weird. There we go. Technology. All right, so just settling in and arriving here, moving the body any way you feel like you need to or want to. It's helpful to allow the eyes to close. It's not necessary. If you don't feel comfortable with your eyes closed, that's okay. You can allow your eyes to be open. If so, just, if you can kind of make a commitment to just allow the eyes to be downcast so it doesn't get creepy for anyone. And let's just settle in. And for a moment, just inviting you to connect into this body. Connect into the felt experience of sitting. Maybe there's comfort, maybe there's discomfort, maybe it's neutral. Just kind of acknowledging what's present. And perhaps expanding the awareness out to the comings and goings of sound. Sounds outside the room. Sounds inside the room. We can bring awareness to the arising and passing away of sound. Another kind of point of attention would be to bring the awareness or attend to the breath. Now, when we're attending to the breath, there sometimes is a tendency to control or try to do something with the breath. From a Buddhist perspective, we're just observing the breath, experiencing the breath, the natural breath. We're not trying to hold our breath or breathe any particular way. It's just a place to rest the attention. Just like the ear hears, there is sound arising, passing. The recognition. Same thing is true with the breath. The breath is arising and passing away. From this perspective, everything is arising and passing away. And we can utilize an observational view of that which is entering into our consciousness and leaving our consciousness. So whether it's sound or sensation or breath or thoughts or feelings, just seeing it all as transient, arising and passing away. The relationship between mindfulness and concentration is concentration kind of helps us stay here, while mindfulness is aware of the arising and the passing away. The changingness of things, situations, sensations. And we learn to relax, observe, allow each breath, each moment course, there may be a tendency to preference the thinking mind, perhaps carried away into some story, past or future, some mental fabrication. It's not a problem. We can just recognizing when the attention wanders off. And with that sense of friendliness, kindness with the mind, redirecting the attention here, now. Relax, observe, allow. The invitation is to abide in the awareness of rising and passing away of all phenomena. And in this kind of open practice, not necessarily preferencing anything, just presence. again and again, recognizing when the attention wanders off, and with that sense of friendliness, kindness with the mind, aiming the attention back. Relax, observe, allow each breath, each moment All right. So at this point, I guess I just kind of open up for questions or comments. Really more questions about the practice, Buddhism in general. Please.
I was just wondering, I was experiencing like a ton, and I've noticed this like sitting in around people while meditating, like a ton of self-consciousness during meditation, where it's like my throat makes a noise and I'm like just like very self-centered, like closed self-consciousness. And if there's any suggestions for like opening up awareness and kind of get out of that, because I was trying to notice it was like self-consciousness and then bring it back, but do you have any other tricks?
Does anyone else experience that? Raise a hand if you experience that. You're not alone. Yeah, I I was once on a longer meditation retreat, and we were pretty close to each other. Like someone was right here, someone was right here, someone was right here, someone was right here. You know, in a room of like 100 people, and I had a deviated septum. I had a nose surgery in the last couple of years, but and my nose, I had a nose whistle. So we're on a 2-month silent meditation retreat. And I'm like a week in and I get a stuffy nose and like a head cold. And then I develop a nose whistle. Right. And so it's like, I can't even really do what it was, but it was, you know, and I must have spent a week of a 2-month meditation retreat just like abusing myself, like super, like God damn it. And then I, you know, there's the whole story about how I deviated my septum. Like it was a fight I had gotten into with this guy, you know, like this, the whole thing. I replayed the whole story. And then it was just so like, you know, mean to myself. And then like super, like every time I would sit down, I stopped sitting in the hall and started to sit in my room, because I didn't want to disturb other people's meditation with my fucking nose whistle, right? And then eventually at some point, I think I got cleared up. I also started to sit outside. I was sitting out in nature, which actually was kind of nice. But I just realized, like, even if it is a note, even if it like they are hearing the nose whistle, I mean, I was hearing it. My head cold cleared up, and it's kind of went away. And anyway, at some point I just kind of came to the realization of just like letting it go. I just like accepting the nose whistle, and that it would just be someone else's practice, you know, just like the sniffler down the, you know, couple rows down from me, or the, you know, person with scratchy sweatpants that was bugging me, or the, you know, just whatever it was, right? The farter, you know, the person that always would make eye contact with me, even though we're not supposed to be making eye contact. Anyway, at the end, the person who was sitting right next to me, but one back, no, she was sitting right next to me. Her name was Dawn. She's a teacher now. She wasn't a teacher then. She was just a dedicated yogi. And so she was close enough to me, and I can't remember if she was sitting either right next to me or just really close. But anyway, I came up to her after we broke silence, after 2 months of silence, right? And the first thing I said to her was, I'm so sorry about my nose whistle. Like, I know I must have been bugging you. And she was like, I didn't hear anything. Like, I don't know what I was so caught up in my own stories and my own practice and my own suffering of this body that I had no awareness of what, your nose whistle. So, so you're forgiven. Like, it's not a big deal, And then they kind of hit me of like, oh yeah, we're all so fucking self-centered that, and in relation to each other, right? And when we're not making eye contact and we're not talking to each other and we're not, then what else comes up but other levels of insecurity, of other levels of, just our quirky kind of self-obsessed personalities, right? So you're not alone. And I totally heard you swallow. And it's okay. It's like there's a couple well-known sayings. One is that it's all grist for the mill. Like, it's all just what's arising. It's all just phenomena arising. The mental fabrications, the grabbing hold of a story and the like dissecting of a story, the feelings, the sensations in the body. It's all just blips of energy in the mind. And this practice, I feel like it helps us again and again when we can see, oh, I'm grasping at this. And then, oh, can I let it go? Just let it be. And eventually that's what happened with my nose whistle, right? I went through all these stories. I was pissed. I was angry at the guy. And, this happened, whatever. It's like a whole story, right? And I was like, feeling the anger, the resentment, the sorrow, all of it. And then just acceptance. Nose whistle. And that is what started, that retreat started the process of me getting to the point of actually having the corrective nose surgery, so that and also that I started to develop apnea. So I wasn't getting good sleep. The theme of this meditation tonight was kind of like, yeah, be with what is. Like, can we just be with the unfolding of our consciousness? And it's going to turn in certain directions, And I kind of started the group tonight with like, oh, and what we're doing here is trying to develop happiness and joy and, freedom and ease. Yeah, that's the end of the road. Maybe there's a couple stops along the way where you're going to, oh, there's some ease. Oh, there's some joy. Oh, there's some happiness. There's some contentment. But most of the work is fucking arduous. Is like seeing the repetitive story over and over again. So much that you get bored with it. Oh, my trauma story again. But instead of grasping or resisting, accepting, allowing. This is the work. The grist for the mill. The only dance there is. It's the other famous Ram Dass book. Right? The only dance there is. It's a great question. I'm glad that you brought it up, because you're not the only one. And I do think it's a little bit more acute when we're a little bit more aware of it when we're in a room full of people versus when you're by yourself. And if people that are, kind of solitary practice at home or, online, maybe there's less of that. It's actually one of the beautiful things about going on a meditation retreat, and like literally like where this table is, there's another person sitting. It's both, aggravating and grist for the mill. It's the work. Oh, how can I? I think there's so much that can be like we can learn just from being around each other and not saying a word to each other, not even looking at each other. It's one of the beauties of this kind of Vipassana retreat style. Because we can learn so much about ourselves and about how we interact in the world just by coming to a group and sitting quietly. That's about all I got for that. Anything else? Questions? Yeah.
When I was a kid, I used to disassociate,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where I could just like disappear into myself, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I was staring out and I'd be like totally still and just kind of like there's a buffer, you know,
Mhm.
between me and then that I realized that went away once I started doing drugs, like
Hmm.
11 or 12, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I get that same sense, like tonight I was getting it. Like when I let go of thoughts or you know, try to empty it out and just
Mhm.
be there. I kind of feel like sometimes I'm going into that space
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that's what I should aim for, you know,
Mhm.
because it seems a little too unconscious,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I don't know, just comparing that state of meditation, being present to like kind of disassociating
Mm-hmm.
from, you know, your surroundings.
Thanks for saying that. Could you guys hear at home? Could you guys hear the question or the comment, question, statement? I'll just kind of brief it. So he's talking about an early state of learning how to dissociate or kind of check out of experience. I would assume a survival strategy, a coping strategy. And, then talked about using drugs, and then actually that didn't happen anymore. Like maybe you were more kind of, I don't know, grounded or connected or something.
Dissociating.
Yeah, I mean that's I think the reason why most people get fucked up, right? I used to say, and I guess I still kind of believe this. I said this while I was drinking. I used to drink to hit the pavement. In other words, I wanted to get so drunk that I hit the pavement with my head. Like I just didn't, that was the goal, obliteration. So it's a side note. So then he was kind of saying, like, comparing like a meditative state to a dissociative state. And is that the goal, or maybe it shouldn't be the goal, right? Right. That's you kind of slip into that and it feels similar. It feels like a similar experience. So I think it's a great awareness, Frank. I think you just being able to go like, oh, wow, like what's happening here is that I'm not conscious. I'm not as aware. I kind of slip into this, dissociative state, which I think sometimes when people want to learn meditation, that's what they want. That's what they want. But that's the opposite of what the Buddha taught. Yeah. What the Buddha taught and what we teach, what I teach, is embodied presence, right? Awareness, because that's where the wisdom comes from. And Frank, is your tendency, like the meditations that you enjoy are kind of open meditations, right?
What do you mean open?
Like what we did tonight, like kind of not really a focus on any one particular thing, but just kind of allowing the open awareness is what it's called, or choiceless awareness. And that there's a natural tendency towards that, probably. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Probably because it was pleasant for you to be able to dissociate, to check out.
That's what I'm feeling now. Is there's those times when I'm reaching those places of bliss not
Mhm.
necessarily bliss, but that
Yeah.
kind of state where I'm like, this is good feeling to me, you know, or
Mhm,
whatever. it
mhm,
is.
sure.
But then I'm kind of in that zone of like, okay, you know, it's a very gray area for me when I'm just kind of letting go as opposed to being there
Mm-hmm,
and paying
mm-hmm.
attention to the letting go, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Maybe that'll get clearer as I explore that.
yeah.
way more, but-
I mean, that's what I would say is just continue to explore it because there is an integration because part of what is happening is healthy. You know, this kind of expansive letting go of the small sense of self into this more expansive awareness of this body being in space or this kind of existence or whatever. But the awareness of, you know, not to get too kind of technical about it, but the awareness of that's what's happening is what's key, right? And my instinct, so one, to explore it, continue to explore it. I think you have enough practice, you have enough experience, you're aware of what's happening. And so explore it, but stay grounded in the body somewhere. So when you start to have that feeling, and I know what you're talking about, you know. Yeah. Sometimes it's a little floaty.
Yeah, I was gonna say, by saying stay in the body, it does feel like it's all happening here,
Uh-huh.
you know,
Yeah, or beyond, right?
but
Yeah.
it's not rooted. It's
Right.
definitely.
So then, which is great about when you're sitting cross-legged on a meditation cushion because your fucking knee hurts, right? Or your ankle or your back. And that is grounding, actually. It's not actually, it doesn't have to pain. The physical discomfort of the body can actually be super freeing. Because of that, it's keeping you right here. And that's something to work with. So anyway, that was a bit of a different kind of angle. But what I'm saying is, yeah, to try to kind of find a location in the body where you can kind of stay grounded while that's happening, because both things are happening at the same time. You know, it's like, I don't know why I was just picturing a balloon that's like tied to the wrist, you know, or something, or like so the balloon is still there, but there's this thread of connection, so it doesn't float away into the unknown, right? Yeah. Yeah, when I was new to meditation, I mean, I'm an escape artist. Like I wanted to check out, I wanted to numb out. That was where the that was my strategy, you know. And I don't know if before I started kind of using substances, I really had a good dissociative tool. I don't know that I did. I mean, I would like spin around, you know, hyperventilating, you know, looking for a head change. But when I found, you know, substances, it was the numb, the escape that I was looking for. And when I first started meditating, I had some of those, like the experiences like you're describing, and I was kind of hooked. And then it got really hard, actually. And then all of the other stuff started happening that happens in the mind, and the stories and the guilt and the shame and the pain and you know, and that was that kind of like where I was saying, like there was some stops along the road where I'd have this like opening of, oh, I can just rest here in this open moment. And that felt good. And that was like, okay, well, I want more of that, you know? So, yeah, you gotta.
Yeah, what was your name again? I'm sorry.
Jason, yeah.
Jason,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I was observing your stillness, so I was really impressed by that. Like, see, like you've been doing this for a while. And kind of like read some of like Noah's stuff on like this style of Buddhism is like, is it called Theravada or Theravada or something?
Yeah.
So like I know there's like kind of like three styles, like Mahayana and Vajrayana. And I really was appealed by Vajrayana Buddhism from the Tibetans.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's like you were talking about like silent retreats and stuff, and like I really like mantras, like
Mhm.
using sound a lot, like,
Mhm.
one of like the sacred, I'm sure you've heard of it. I'm not sure, maybe they don't use it in Theravada, but it's Om Mani Padme Hum,
Mhm.
Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, and like.
I mean, that's primarily Tibetan or Sanskrit, but yeah.
Okay,
Uh-huh.
okay, so.
But but I understand, yeah, the jewel in the lotus, right?
So,
Sure.
I would chant
Helpful.
this like Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum,
Mhm.
like the idea is to chant it 100,000 times, and sure enough, like. They have like this thing called a prayer wheel, and I
Mhm.
bought one, and you just like spin it around, it just really accelerates your consciousness and like. It sends you, and I just felt like a lot of compassion just
Hmm.
floating inside me.
Mhm.
Anyways, what I'm getting at is like, do you chant mantras at all?
Mhm. Mhm.
As in, do you use sound, or is Theravada just the path of just silence?
This is a great question. I forgot your name.
Shanti.
Shanti. Yeah. Yeah. Did you guys hear the question? Basically, he was kind of asking about mantras and do I use mantras in my practice, and does Theravada have some form of mantra, or which I'm so glad you asked, because I was trying to figure out how to make this transition, and you just helped me make this transition. Like it's the perfect question for what I wanted to talk about tonight. Which is basically kind of like an orientation to Buddhism and then the Buddha. So I'll answer your question and then kind of elaborate. So there are, really there's two schools of Buddhism: Mahayana, which means kind of the greater vehicle, and Theravada, which means kind of the smaller vehicle. So, or the greater path, wider path, and the narrower path. There's lots of different ways in which that's kind of described. And then there's a third component of Mahayana, that is Vajrayana, right? Which is also really known as Tibetan Buddhism. But there's actually, Tibetan Buddhism is actually, or Mahayana, Vajrayana is also pretty soundly located in Nepal. So Nepalese Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism are very similar, and of course they're very close to each other. Different sides of the mountain, right? So Theravadan Buddhism primarily, which is what we do here, which is also sometimes it's called insight meditation. Sometimes it's called Vipassana. Vipassana is really a practice within Theravadan Buddhism. This is one of the best translations, I think, is the path of the elders. In other words, Theravadan Buddhism, what I have studied, what I've practiced, and I have studied in Tibetan meditation and Zen, and it's another form of Japanese style, it's called it's not the chant is Namiho Renge Kyo, but I can't remember the name of the style of Buddhism. But anyway, so the path of the elders, early Buddhism, focuses on Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, and his teachings and the practices that he taught. And then Mahayana Buddhism, which developed, there was a split. So, by the way, there's a book called Buddhism: A Concise Introduction, which is written by a Mahayana philosophy and religion professor and a Theravadan philosophy and religion professor. One is from Berkeley and one is from Harvard. And it's a great book, super good, if you're interested in this kind of stuff. And my thought was to really focus on, there's one actually chapter in that book, which is where I first heard this term, the rebel saint, which is kind of where I got the name of this group, Rebel Dharma. So in this book, so basically the book is about comparing and contrasting Theravadan Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism. Let me finish my thought before I get into that. Mahayana Buddhism focuses primarily on the practice of compassion, and they incorporate practices and teachings that are after the time of the Buddha. So there are some scholars who kind of reinterpreted or expanded or expounded on the original teachings of the Buddha. And that's Nagarjuna, and there's, other kind of philosophers, and, one of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's pre-incarnations was, involved there. So most of Mahayana Buddhism, not all, Zen is a little different, but let's focus on Vajrayana Buddhism. And Vajrayana, Tibetan Buddhism, Tibetan Nepalese Buddhism, has a lot of focus on ritual, like the spinning of the prayer wheel. I call it the Catholicism of Buddhism, because there's lots of bells and whistles and lots of activities, and their art is amazing and intricate. This actually what we have here is they're images of Mahakala. So that's a deity found within Tibetan Buddhism. And so one of the reasons why that is because the original religion in Tibet before Buddhism arrived is called Bon. And Bon was an animism religion. And so there's all these kind of, they were like tree spirits, and, there were these kind of earth gods and heavenly gods, and very similar to the kind of Greek kind of polytheism, right? Or pantheism. Yeah, polytheism, pantheism, many kind of different kind of gods and whatnot. So when Buddhism came in, the cultural, and this is what happens with everywhere that Buddhism has gone from the time of the Buddha spreading out, is that Buddhism mixes, doesn't take over, doesn't stamp out, mixes with whatever's present in the country that it's gone to, or in the place that it's gone to, such as American Buddhism. Right? There is a evolution that's happening with Buddhism. I'm an example of that, where I'm taking my cultural perspectives, my atheistic perspective, my, kind of, and even some of my prior, Christian kind of indoctrination, and, either blending or opposing what's happening there. For me, each person's a little bit different. So Tibetan Buddhism Bon mixed with Buddhism that came in through China. Interestingly enough, the way that Buddhism spread is for the 45 years that the Buddha taught before he died, he pretty much stayed in kind of northeastern India. There's kind of around Nepal and northeastern India. And India is a huge country. Continent. I mean, it's not even really, I guess it's a subcontinent. But the point is that Buddhism spread to Sri Lanka, which is an island. And it just kind of locked in, stayed there for, it's still there 2,500 years later, the primary religion. And it also moved up into Burma from India, up into Burma, Myanmar. And then from there into Thailand, and then from Thailand into China, and then, from Burma and Thailand, and then also Cambodia, and all of Southeast Asia. So that's mainly considered Theravadan Buddhism, because it's the earliest kind of migration of Buddhism, and then so on and so forth, and then kind of sprawled out along the trade routes, the Silk Road, all of these different Pakistan. It also went off on the other direction into Pakistan and Afghanistan, but it got killed out pretty quickly. I mean, a couple hundred years. And then so on and so forth, kind of spread out from there. made its way all the way around China and Korea and Japan, and then back and then into Tibet, and then from Tibet back into India. There we're talking 1,000 years, right? And so most of the Buddhism that's found in India today is actually really heavily influenced by Tibetan Buddhism. And there's no right or wrong or good or bad. It's just different focuses. And Mahayana tends to focus on compassion, on being of service, on it. The reason why it's called the larger vehicle is because at some point there was like the austerity of the Theravadan Buddhism, the kind of elder path, was like, all right, so this whole renunciation thing, this whole celibacy thing, like we have to loosen it up if we're gonna have, of course, I'm talking about my interpretation, also found within Buddhism, A Concise Introduction, though. Anyway, and so that we have to loosen it up, right? Because it's a little like, okay, the Buddha, he became awakened, he got enlightened, but there's some things that are just not going to go for mass appeal, right? So it became much more about service and about ritual, because people like to do rituals. It's part of culture, right? To kind of have ritualistic kind of understanding of things. And that is still true within Theravada, within Southeast Asian Buddhism. Like there's tons of rituals that are happening, bowing and flowers and candles and chanting. But most of what is taught in Tibetan Buddhism is, or in Mahayana Buddhism, is a deviation from what is original to the Buddha. When Theravada focuses, or insight, or what we do here, focuses on the original teachings of the Buddha. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that this is coming up because I just started reading this book. It's called The Buddha and His Teachings from Narada. Me and Noah went to, there is in Compton, there is a Sri Lankan Buddhist temple, and they're amazing, beautiful little monks. And the abbot gave me that book. That's kind of their like way of being hot. Like monks don't have a lot, but they have a lot of books because they're writing and they're collecting, and it's their gift giving. And so he gave me this book, and I started reading it, and I'm really enjoying it, actually. It's the story of the Buddha and his teachings. And, I've read, 25, 30 books like it, but there's just something about it. And so it's kind of inspired me to want to, I'm going to start talking a little bit more about who was this man that lived 2,568 years ago. And, is still, so 500 years before the birth of Christ. And, Christ and Buddha, both, their teachings continue on and have been, perhaps bastardized, or perhaps changed, or accommodated to different kind of groups and cultures. Neither of them, Christ or the Buddha, really saw themselves as saviors. That really came later. The Buddha definitely didn't. The Buddha was like, no. I found my own salvation through this path, and I will teach you the path, and you can see for yourself. But it's not about exonerating me. Like, while the Buddha was alive, there was no statues of the Buddha. There was no paintings of the Buddha. The Buddha didn't want any. He was like, I'm just a teacher. Similar to the Dalai Lama, who, when asked, he's the leader of Tibet, the spiritual guide of Tibet. And when asked, he'll say, I'm just a simple monk, right? I realized that I didn't actually answer your question now. So within Buddhism, there really isn't, I mean, within Theravadan Buddhism, there really isn't mantra per se.
Mm.
And it is primarily about inward reflection, training the mind to release its grasp on our deluded belief around self and personality and ego, would be some way to look at it. Yet, what you're saying, Om Mani Padme Hum, it's a beautiful concentration practice. I studied, I experienced some of Norichin Buddhism, that's what it's called. And Norichin Buddhism uses Namiho Renge Kyo, which I can't remember exactly what it means, but it basically is kind of, it's like, you know, it's about the Heart Sutra. It's about kind of freeing one's heart and mind. And the idea is you're using that as a repetitive practice, what I call repeated phrase. And we do that here. It's called metta, right? May I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be free from suffering. But it has a bit of a different focus. So instead, and you know, there are people who will say that phrase in Pali. But I think this is my kind of American Buddhist bent, which is, I feel like we should understand what we're saying, you know, and not everyone does. Like I don't remember what Namiho Renge Kyo means, right? But if I had studied Norichin Buddhism for longer, I would probably have figured it out, and you know, I would have known. I would know now, trying to recall it 10, 15 years later after I practiced that. But the concentration practice is absolutely what the Buddha, so the essence of the practice is what the Buddha taught, right? Same thing with the prayer wheel. The essence of the practice is what the Buddha taught. It's just a different translation because it's a different country and it's a different culture, right? And I do feel like what's happening here in the States, and it's come in different, you know, packages, right? We have the, you know, there's the mixed salad, or what's it called? The tossed salad used to be the approach here in America. People come and there, you know, there's the tomatoes and there's the lettuce and there's the carrots that are all in their little groups, right? Ethnic groups. And then it was the melting pot, right? And I do believe that that's actually happening here in America. Is that as we are understanding, Buddhism came as Zen practice, as Tibetan practice, as Thai practice, as Korean practice, as Chinese practice. And so very culturally packaged. And what's been happening is that there is a unwrapping of that package to get back to, you know, the essence of what the Buddha taught. Because Buddhism isn't Chinese, Japanese, Korean. It's not even Indian. There's very little Buddhism found in India today. And at the time of the Buddha, you know, he was a rebel. He was he wasn't liked. He was anti-establishment. He was he was, you know, all about human rights. He was anti-oppression, you know, and I have some notes here because this is what I wanted to focus on, but I want to check my notes here are, I once wrote a paper, The Rebellious Nature of the Buddha. So I'll be going off some of the notes. So and I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to kind of use it as my frame. So Shakyamuni, which is, so Siddhartha Gautama, was a man who was born in this small area between India and Nepal. And it was Nepal. It's Nepal. And he was wealthy. They say his father was a king. I think maybe like a lord, or like, like he kind of lived in Beverly Hills, you know what I mean? Like, or, but maybe Calabasas, like he had, his family had money, they had vacation homes, they had palaces, but also, Siddhartha's mother died, either at his birth or shortly after his birth. And then his father married his mother's sister to kind of keep it in the family. And so that Siddhartha had a mother, and that was still along the matrilineal lines. So I find that fascinating that Siddhartha was born and had early childhood trauma, developmental trauma, abandonment. I think that's fascinating to me. And then, was given all of these, extravagant gifts, and, was also, he was very much in the warrior caste. So he was basically being groomed to be a king, the next lord of the area, next in line. And so he had everything he wanted throughout his adolescence, but there was this ache inside of Shakyamuni. When you hear Shakyamuni, they are part of the Shakta tribe. That was their tribe. And so Shakyamuni Buddha is the way that in India particularly they talk about the Buddha. I don't know. This stuff, I could fucking tweak out on this stuff all day. Like, I mean, it's just super interesting to me. But what I wanted to kind of say about it is that, so, the Buddha often opposed the strict class system. So there was this kind of hierarchical class system, Brahmins at the top, kind of wealthy, 1%ers, right? And then there was everyone else. And then there was the middle class, right? And then there was the lowest class, the poor. And this was just as it is now, right? So even though the Buddha or Shakyamuni was born into this kind of warrior Brahmin class, this kind of upper class, he rebelled against it. And he positioned himself against the kind of higher authority. So he kind of rebelled against his own position. The Buddha is said to have been kind of very sensitive and intellectual. And so through his schooling, he often questioned the Brahmins, his teachers. He was kind of precocious, right? He would kind of question the reality of the kind of Hindu teachings and rites and rituals that were being placed. So he was, precocious, and he was, kind of questioning, and yet he was the son of a king, right? So he kind of could do whatever he wanted. So he was regarded as belonging to, this is, throughout his whole life, a group of reformist thinkers. Right. So there were at the time of the Buddha, like growing up, there were two main groups. There were nihilists, and then there were materialists. So the materialists were like, there's nothing beyond this world, and get basically the kind of corporate greed, kind of get as much as you can, and that's what's going to make you happy. The nihilists were like, nothing matters. And sometimes they were also hedonists. They were hedonists, right? They were like as much kind of pleasure seeking as possible. Or maybe I'm getting that wrong. The materialists were more into the pleasure seeking, and the nihilists were just like, nothing matters, and we're all going to die. We're all, there's nothing beyond this world, and we're all just worm dirt. So that was what was happening at the time. So intermingling was taboo at the time of the Buddha, especially around accepting food. So this kind of higher class, lower class. So when Siddhartha left the temple and kind of bailed, he basically like ran away from home, and he set out with his guitar and his dreadlocks, and he like was going to go to all the shows and the the festivals and kind of meet the people. That's what he really kind of wanted to do. Rebel, is I'm making a joke around Trustafarians, right? So this is, but he was compelled with these questions that I think were, in my view, my psychological kind of view, were really about developmental trauma. Like he had this ache that was from birth that went unanswered, and none of the pleasure, all of the food, all of the money, all of the sex, all of the drugs didn't fill that hole, right? So he broke out of he left. He actually had gotten married and had a baby, and right as he had a baby, his son Rahula, he left. And the marriage was an arranged marriage to further the kind of royalty and kind of families, and as happened. So there's some thoughts about the Buddha was a deadbeat dad, right? Because he left his son and his wife to be taken care of in the palace by his family while he went to go kind of basically become the healer of the world. It's the way it was described. So he set out, and then, in setting out, he basically let go of everything, took on robes, shaved his head. And one of what I was talking about here around accepting food is he lived amongst the lowest class, right? He had nothing. He gave it all up, right? He basically became homeless. A mendicant is what they called it, as a way of kind of relinquishing or renouncing possessions and greed. And then he worked on concentrating his mind. So for several years, and this meant mantra, this meant doing certain practices. So the way that this is often talked about is there was a calling. The Buddha had a calling, maybe from birth, maybe from that early developmental trauma. And then there was a departure. The Buddha to be, Siddhartha Gautama, kind of left his home, left what his security, left what he knew to kind of forge his own path. He didn't want to be a king, actually. And then so there's the calling, there's the departure, and then there's the struggle. And so we'll pick it up there next week, where I'll talk more about the struggle and the awakening and the return, which this is the arc of what's called a hero's journey in Jungian psychoanalytic thinking. And that we're all doing this. We all have this calling. We all have this departure. We all have this struggle. We all have an awakening, and we all have a return. So I can open up. We have a couple minutes. I can open up for any kind of questions or clarifications. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it was I think what it was going on. Well, I shouldn't say I think. Yeah, what I read was that the Brahmins, they were vegetarian, right?
Mm.
And the Buddha was raised vegetarian, but they would slaughter animals to the gods, and the Buddha was like, "This is fucking ridiculous."
Mm.
So that's kind of like
that's one of the many rituals that that the Buddha was like, "Why are you doing this?"
Yeah.
Another thing that the Buddha rejected was the bathing in the Ganges as a holy river, which is considered one of the holiest rivers. It's 98% fecal matter, and now right. When I was there, right, and actually it's also where they dump dead bodies. because it's, sacred. So yeah. So, and then every morning people, they go and but even in the time of the Buddha, this idea of like kind of cleansing, like if I, then this is true in Catholicism, this is true in a lot of Christianity, right? Being baptized, being cleansed of sin, being cleansed of our impure actions, going to confession, although there's a part of that within Buddhism, but anyway, the kind of bathing in holy water, the Buddha was like, that's ridiculous. Like that's not how you change. That's not how you free your heart and mind. You free your heart and mind by looking within and seeing the tendencies of your mind, seeing the roots of greed, hatred, and delusion, and then changing them, shifting them. So yeah. All right. So we'll pick it up from there. Any I don't know, any questions or thoughts or comments? Okay, hopefully this was entertaining, fun, I don't know, exciting. If you're a Buddhist geek, then you were like, this is great. Maybe. I enjoyed it. And I'm basically just going to kind of, as I'm engaging with this book, and I'll bring in some pieces of this book, but I'm just going to kind of, I feel like, people are new, people haven't been around, they're new to Buddhism. We need to talk about who the Buddha was, who this person was, not a god. Buddhism isn't, well, no, let's talk about what Buddhism is. Buddhism is a religion. Buddhism is a psychological method. Buddhism is a philosophy. Buddhism is a culture. Buddhism is non-theistic. So we'll end there. If you want to hear more, come back next week. We'll move into the struggle and see what else is present. All right. So just know that anything that we do here as in the time of the Buddha till now, the kind of Theravadan way is that we don't charge for practice or for teaching. And this center is run on the donation of those who attend. And there's a suggested donation of about $20. Of course, no one is left out or kept out for lack of funds. So if you want to support the center, please, you can do so. There's a bowl, there's a QR code, Venmo, whatever. Or on against the stream, you can click the donate button. Pretty easy to find. And then also, like me, I don't take any like payment, but this is, if you want to offer dana, or what's known as generosity, to me, you can through Venmo, Jason Murphy, or No BS Buddhist. All right, so let's do what's called an exchange of merits. So just gathering all the goodness of your practice, all the goodness that has come out of this teaching, this practice, this evening, and first taking it in, just letting it in. You were here, you spent an hour and a half engaging in training your mind and opening your heart. Congratulate yourself for that. And then also knowing that we don't just do this practice for ourselves, but we engage in this practice and this training to free all beings from suffering. May all beings be free. Even you, even me.